What's up, guys? Today I want to talk a little bit about this sudden, well, not so sudden, but this big push that we have now about Kyle Busch and the 200 wins that are, right around the corner. And, I guess we're supposed to really care about this. I'm going to tell you what I think about it, but also, once again, talk a little bit more about why NASCAR continues to fail when it comes to getting more people interested in coming and watching the sport, or people walking away. Uh, this weekend, Kyle Busch won. Yeah, he won the Cup race, but he also won another Xfinity race. And it's amazing to me how people don't see a problem with repeating the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result. What do I mean by that? This idea that these Cup drivers coming down to the trucks or Xfinity lower series, and that's going to generate interest and excitement for those lower series, has already been proven repeatedly as a failure. It does not bring more interest. The ratings don't haven't made it hasn't made a difference in ratings, and it hasn't made a difference in the stands. The stands are still empty. Okay? In fact, I think it's had the opposite effect. Why should people sit through an Xfinity race where a Cup drivers are involved and they're getting the best rides? So here you have Kyle Busch, and he's winning all these races. He comes down, and it's like taking candy from a baby. Where's the excitement in that? Where's the challenge? And I'm not taking anything away from Kyle Busch. He's a great driver. As much as I don't like this guy, he's a great driver. He's one of the best drivers in the world, which only cements my point. Why the fuck does he need to come down to truck and Xfinity for? That just shows his selfishness. He just wants to stack up the trophies and pad his stats. That's all he cares about. And of course, it's another payday, an easy payday. These wins are easy. It's inferior competition. So how is this good for NASCAR as a product? How is this good for Xfinity and trucks as a series? Anybody that says this is a good thing is talking out of their fucking ass. Because we've already seen we have enough proof by now, all these years that we've been watching this, and NASCAR ratings continue to drop, and the stands continue to remain empty. And you mean to tell me NASCAR can't put two and two together and realize that, you know what, maybe letting these fucking top level Cup drivers come down and spank these kids with, by the way, getting the top level equipment? How is that fair? This is why people have walked away from NASCAR. This is why NASCAR has steadily dropped through the years, because people get tired of watching the same people dominate everything. And I talked about this earlier with Jimmy Johnson and winning all those championships. And you think it's a coincidence that during that same Jimmy Johnson run that NASCAR ratings continue to drop? That the stands at all these races continue to get more and more empty? You think that's a coincidence? That's not a coincidence. People get tired of watching the same fucking people dominate. It doesn't matter what sport you're talking about. And it's the worst in NASCAR because of the system that they have. They allow these super teams to have a stranglehold on the sport. So every week, whoever wins, it's going to be from a Gibbs team, Penske, Hendrick, or Haas, Stuart Haas. You rarely ever get a surprise winner. Okay? There's no such thing as a fucking upset win in NASCAR anymore. It's very rare. So even looking at the top, forget about the winner, look at the top 5 cars. Every fucking week, it's the same group of people in the top 5. Where is the excitement in that? This is supposed to be a sport. And no matter how much better certain people may be, there's you still should be able to see somebody who's kind of unexpected win a race once in a while, but it doesn't happen because these super teams have a huge advantage over everyone else. And I said it before and I'll say it again. If NASCAR doesn't step in and do something about it, this sport is going to die completely. The only people who still watch NASCAR are hardcore fans. Casual fans have walked away because they don't want to see the same fucking people dominate. And then you got Kyle Busch going down, and you know, he should be embarrassed. I would be embarrassed if I'm a cup driver of his caliber going down to these lower series and spanking these kids who don't have the experience he has. They're just not as good as he is, right? There's a reason why these are lower series. You don't see major leaguers on their spare time going down and saying, yeah, I'm going to play this weekend and for the AAA affiliate. And then pad those stats up so that I could say, yeah, you know, as a major leaguer, I have 300 home runs, but I also have 150 home runs in the minor leagues. And we're going to add all that up and we're going to talk about me having 450 home runs to elevate myself. Nobody does that. That would be ridiculous, right? They're just thinking about it, that concept is insane. But yet when it comes to NASCAR, nobody bats an eye. It's okay for a guy like Kyle Busch, a Cup champion, a guy who does win a lot in the Cup Series, to go down to this lower series and just think up the show and win another trophy. And everybody's and the worst part is these announcers trying to make it seem like it's a good thing. When you're sitting there, you're watching this, and you know there's something wrong here. But yet, these announcers are telling you how great it is. And they're pumping up this whole thing about Kyle Busch winning 200 races total and making comparisons to Richard Petty. That's an insult. That's insulting. A guy like Richard Petty, who spent his whole career in the Cup Series, his wins are Cup wins. I'm not taking anything away from Kyle Busch, so Kyle Busch fans, don't start pulling your hair out and getting upset. Nobody's taking anything away from his talent. But it's a fucking joke. You should be embarrassed to watch this man go down and stink up the show. And he has no problem with it because he has a fucking ego. Unbelievable ego. He doesn't care. He gets to hold up another trophy, cash in another check, and brag about how awesome he is at a lower series. And he doesn't feel any sense of shame about it. This is why you rarely saw Cup drivers, in the Busch series years ago. Once in a while you saw it, but it wasn't something that was common. And guys, especially top-level Cup guys, that's insulting. Or I would say embarrassing. For a guy like Richard Petty to go down to a lower series and just beat up on everybody, what the fuck is that proving? But see, that's this new generation. They don't see anything wrong with it. They don't feel ashamed about it. And worst of all, NASCAR sees no problem. They've been doing this for years now. And this is what I mean. Repeating the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. These people are insane. They don't see the fucking obvious problem of watching these same guys dominate and still watching the ratings drop. The attendance at these races is embarrassing. When you see how many empty seats are there, these lower series do not have an identity. You don't get to really talk about these younger drivers in their own element because you got some asshole like Denny Hamlin or Kyle Busch or all of these guys who come from the Cup Series, and then they take the best rides. So it's not enough that these guys are legitimate Cup drivers with world-class talent. That's not enough. They also have to get the best rides, because when was the last time you saw a guy like Kyle Busch on in that level come down to a lower series and actually drive junk? They're not going to do it. You want to impress me, Kyle Busch? Why don't you go down and trade your fucking ride to some kid who's driving junk? And you say, this week, I'm going to pick this driver. I'll drive his car, and he drives my car. And let's just see what happens. I guarantee you people would probably tune in to watch that. But see, they don't want that. He wants to be in the best equipment. He doesn't want to be, at a disadvantage. This is why I don't fucking respect people like that. Because he doesn't have to do it. He could say, you know what, I'm a Cup driver. I'm focusing on Cup. I don't want to take a ride from somebody who probably deserves it. And who cares if I stink up the show? I get another fucking trophy. I get to pad my stats so that these announcers could talk about how awesome it is and how I'm going to win 200 races and actually talk about me next to Richard Petty. Now, I know some people out there are going to point out that, oh, by the way, Kyle Busch did say that it's not the same thing. And yeah, kudos to him for admitting that. But it's kind of disingenuous because you're admitting something, but yet it's not stopping you from doing it. Because you know that even though you're saying, hey, it's not the same thing, guys, please don't do this. But you're fucking, it's like wink, wink. He knows that everybody else is going to talk about it. So what difference does it make? If you really feel that it's not the same thing, why are you doing it? And I know some people say, oh, he loves racing so much. He'll race anything. NASCAR doesn't need this. This is hurting the sport. Just like I said, all those wins and championships Jimmy Johnson had, I'm sorry to say, that hurt NASCAR. Think of how many people got tired of watching NASCAR because it's like the Jimmy Johnson show. You don't want to admit the problem. It's right in front of you. It's right in front of you. And NASCAR, I give them credit for, they do seem more willing than any other sport, to be honest, to make changes. So I commend them for that. But see, making changes and sticking with changes that are bad changes, those are two different things. And while NASCAR has, commendably made good changes, and they've also made bad changes. And they wait too long to react. The chase was a good thing. And I know a lot of people don't like it. But the chase in concept is a good idea. People forget how bad the fucking championships were before the chase. I'm sorry. A lot of times you knew who the champion was well before the end of a fucking season. Also, every legitimate sport has a fucking playoff system. Why should NASCAR be any different? The problem isn't the chase format, it's the way it's implemented. There's too many fucking cars in the chase. You have a field of 40 cars and almost half the field makes the chase. That's a joke. And NASCAR is too slow to really start really, taking that into account. I'm not even sure they know that's a problem. So, in fact, I know that they don't think it's a problem, or they would have changed it. Because they don't hesitate when they want to make a change. They just make the change. Why can't you just chop the field down to 8 cars? 8 cars is plenty for a chase. And it doesn't water it down. And if you're in the top 8 in points, you deserve a spot in the playoffs. And then you set up the points so that the guys who've actually won more races have more points than the other guys. And you kind of make it fair, right? So if you had a really great season, you deserve to have advantages in the playoffs. It shouldn't just be, everybody's on an even level. But there are ways to do it so that it's fair. But still, you have a playoff system. But the way it is now, 16 fucking cars, it's a joke. And then if you're lucky enough to make it to the end, to that last race, all you have to do is finish ahead of the other drivers, even if those other drivers may have had much better seasons. more wins. It should come down to points. It's not enough to just finish ahead of the other three or whatever, how many people you got to finish ahead of. You should have to finish ahead of them by a certain amount of points. Because it should make a difference what your average finishes are, how many points you accumulate. But that doesn't mean get rid of the playoff. The playoffs is a good thing. It's just the way NASCAR does it, it's fucked up. And it's watered down. It's watered down. They've added 16 fucking cars to this thing. You don't need more than 8 cars. 8 cars is good for the amount of drivers that are in the field. That's enough about that, but that's just an example of things NASCAR has done and still need to work on. I'm telling you now, if NASCAR does not clamp down on the stranglehold these super teams have on the sport, and these smaller series, they're not paying attention. They're still letting these cup drivers stink up the show, and it's a joke. And they come down there, they're taking the best rides. I'm sorry, it's not fair. I don't care what anyone says. If anybody thinks that Kyle Busch is on an even level in terms of fairness in these races, you're out of your fucking mind. He always gets one of the best cars. So we already know he's better than just about every driver in these lower series. Does he really need that added level of an advantage? And we all know NASCAR's not like other sports. It's not just about the athlete. It's also about the equipment. That's what makes NASCAR different. The best drivers in the world cannot succeed without good equipment. And you've seen it. You've seen really good drivers struggle when they're not getting good cars. Jimmy Johnson. I was talking about him, how dominant he was. He's not so dominant anymore, is he? Well, yeah, let's be honest. Hendrick, they're still a super team, but they've kind of fallen behind a little bit to other teams. Other teams have caught up and whatever, but they're still a super team. But he's not dominating anymore. Did he suddenly become less talented? No. What does this tell you? It's because of the cars. So this sport is different. It's about the driver talent, but it's also about the equipment. And I'm telling you, NASCAR really needs to put an end to these cup drivers coming down to lower series. You're killing these lower series, and they're not listening. They're just continuing to do it. And now you watch this weekend was the biggest example. He won the Xfinity race, and then he goes and wins the Cup race. The Cup race was not bad, but it wasn't great, and it wasn't that different from past races. So even though this aero package was not really in full effect, it's a short track, they still had this massive rear spoiler and that splitter. So you still got all this downforce, and did it really alter the racing? Not visually, not on TV, not to a viewer watching. So if you're making those changes and you're not seeing a visual difference, what's the fucking point? So far, this aero package, even last week at Vegas, you didn't really see as big of a difference or change as was expected. Also, there's they got all the rear downforce in the world. Even at the short track, it makes a difference because these cars, how many cars did you see get loose or spin out on the exit? I remember seeing it one time yesterday. And I think that was due to a tire going down or something. I think it was Chase Elliott. But the point is, these guys could mat it coming out of the corner, even on a short track, and it's not that bad. These guys are going the wrong direction with these packages. I'm not going to get into it. I talked enough about it, but I'm just saying, the race wasn't bad. It was okay. It was an okay race. But once again, you see the same people running up front, dominating. There were a couple, here, like Matt DiBenedetto had a decent run till the end, till he had equipment problems. But he was driving, that 95 car is not bottom tier shit either. So they can kind of, they've shown that with Casey Kane that they can kind of stick around in the top 15. But other than that, really, you see the same group of guys every week up front. How is that going to attract casual fans? And my stomach was in knots just listening to these fucking announcers talk about Kyle Busch and the 200 win thing. They're trying so hard to sell you on the idea that this is such a wonderful, momentous accomplishment. And I'm not saying, listen, I'm not saying it's meaningless. Yes, he's talented. It does take a certain level of talent to do that well. But really, you should be ashamed of yourselves actually comparing this to Richard Petty's 200 Cup wins. And Kyle Busch should be ashamed. You know, what are you proving? Like I said, if you want to impress me, go down and trade your car with some middle tier car. Just one of these lower tier teams. That would make it interesting. This week, Kyle Busch trades his car with so-and-so. And that guy gets to drive his car. And let's see what happens. I'd tune in to see that. But this other shit, I'm not watching. I'm not sitting through that. And no matter how hard these announcers try to sell me on the idea that this is such a momentous occasion, I'm not buying it. I'm not impressed. He has no business running lower tiers. And NASCAR, if they don't do something about this and put an end to this, yeah, they lowered it. You can't run as many races. It doesn't matter. Because the races they do run, they go in, they spank the field, and they stink up the show. So what difference does it make? The races Kyle Busch decides not to run, some other jerk-off is going to run. Denny Hamlin or Kevin Harvick or these guys come down and run. Every fucking week it's some asshole from the Cup Series coming down there. And these Xfinity drivers, they're never going to admit it. So those of you who say, oh, they say they like the competition and they want to race against the best. Yeah, they want to compete against the best, but not when they're not in the same equipment. And they're not going to admit it. You think it's fun for these guys to get their asses kicked every week by some Cup driver? It's not fun. They're not going to admit it. You know why? Because they're not going to fucking, they're not going to ruin their opportunity by bad-mouthing NASCAR on this. But it's not fun. Okay? They're just not going to admit it. So let's cut the shit. This 200 win thing is meaningless to me. And I'm sorry. And yeah, Kyle Busch is a great driver, but stay in Cup. Stop fucking destroying this product. Because these Xfinity races and truck races, nobody cares about. Nobody cares. And it's because you're letting the same fucking people dominate every week. And in the Cup Series, same fucking thing. You let these mega teams have a stranglehold on the sport. And every week it's the same group of drivers competing for wins. Running up front. What does it matter if you have a couple of lead changes? But it's like Kevin Harvick, Kyle Busch, and some Penske driver. It's like the same group of guys. And all I want is NASCAR to make sure that these teams are as evenly matched as possible in terms of equipment. And the best way to do that is to chop these teams down. These 4-car teams, it's ludicrous. I honestly, I earlier said chop them down to 3 teams, but even that's too much, man. I honestly think NASCAR needs to clamp down, and that's it. No owner has more than 2 cars, and if you don't like it, so be it. You got to think of the wellness of the sport before any of these guys. And now these guys have charters. They can sell this to other lower tier teams. Whatever. These mega teams are killing the sport. And they're not making the right changes. They're focused on shit that is really not the problem. Those are my thoughts. What do you guys think? Are you as pumped up about this 200 win Kyle Busch thing or not? I'm curious to know. So I look forward to your comments.